All right, guys, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us for this important and timely webinar, Exposing the Dark Web During Uncertain Times. We're so very excited to have you here. Now, before we get started, I wanted to share just a few housekeeping items with you to make sure everyone has a great webinar experience. First, this session is being recorded and all attendees will receive a link to the recording via email. Also, everyone has been placed in listen-only mode, but we do want to hear from you and answer any questions you may have. So just enter questions in the chat feature so that our presenters can address it later on in the broadcast. Now, as an added bonus for joining, we have not one, but two free gifts: a complimentary dark web assessment and consultation, and number two, a complimentary network assessment and consultation. Now that is about a $1,500 value for companies with 15 or more users. As a key sponsor for this event, I'd like to introduce myself along with a brief overview of Vivitec. My name is Terry Pruitt, and I'm in client engagement for Vivitec. With offices throughout the Midwest, Southeast, and Southwest, and a national footprint across the nation, I represent the Southwest region of the United States, based in Central Texas. I am, and we are, as close as a call or an email. Now, Vivitec is an award-winning cybersecurity and fractional IT support partner that is focused on simplicity, security, and reliability. Whether you work out of your home or office, at Vivitec, we secure your IT assets, prevent data breaches, solve IT compliance, IT downtime, and IT inefficiency issues. We provide business continuity and disaster recovery programs for small to mid-sized businesses, either as an IT department, your IT department, or supporting your IT department. In short, we utilize technologies to increase your productivity and your profitability of your organization. Now, without further ado, I'd like to thank you again for joining us and introducing you to our resident dark web expert, Kim Knies. And she'll walk us through exposing the dark web during uncertain times. Now, Kim is a client success manager and is focused on cybersecurity, and she's particularly passionate about helping organizations leverage credential monitoring and employee training and awareness program. Kim works with companies to help them understand cyber threats and reduce their vulnerabilities. All right, Kim, take it away now.
Thanks so much, Terry. Really appreciate that, and so glad to see so many attendees on the webinar. Very excited to talk to everybody today about cybersecurity and some of the threats posed to businesses by the dark web. I'm really hoping that you find this conversation helpful, timely, and relevant, and that you're able to take away some insights and tips to help keep your business safe. We've all seen stories about data breaches, right? It seems like we cannot turn on the news or scan the headlines without seeing a story about the latest company that got breached and how it affected millions of users and included all kinds of personal data that's now out on the dark web. We've seen some very prominent and well-known and successful companies get wrapped up in these breach stories, and the number of affected users seems to grow and increase with every new incident. In fact, these headlines have become so prevalent and normalized, I'm afraid we've become a little bit immune and don't really think about what this information can mean and the damage it can cause. We feel detached from the stories and the threats and the potential impacts, or even worse, we don't know what to do about it, so we do nothing. I think we're at a point, though, where we really have to confront it head on by answering some important questions. Things like, what does it mean when our data or our company's data or our employees' data is out on the dark web? How does that data get there? Why does it matter? And how does the dark web even work? So during this time together, what we'd really like to do is open a conversation around these questions, focus on the current landscape of cybersecurity as it's impacting small to medium-sized businesses. And we'd like to see if we can maybe take away some of the mystique of the dark web, maybe pull back the curtain a bit and walk you through some actual screenshots of the dark web, as well as talk about some of the methods that cyber criminals are using to steal our data. But to start out, I'd like to give you an idea of exactly how these breaches are happening, which ties into this notion that it's often our employees that are the greatest threat to a company's security. So here's what I mean by that. We're looking at an overview of the different ways that breaches occur. Maybe no surprise that the king of the hill here, the top offender, is phishing scams, which have come a really long way in sophistication. We've probably all seen those phishing emails, those fake emails that appear to be from a legitimate company and that ask victims to provide some sort of sensitive information, usually through a link that looks like it'll go to the company's website. But that website, of course, is actually a really clever fake, and the information that the user provides, the compromised credentials, go straight to the criminals behind the scam, who then use those details to commit fraud, sell them on the dark web. Super low tech, but unfortunately pretty highly effective as well. The second most prevalent way that breaches happen is through compromised or stolen credentials, but we may not know exactly how they were obtained. And then we go on to see some other methods here, right? Ransomware attacks use malicious software or malware, which is also listed here, that's designed to prevent access to a computer or to data until a ransom is paid. Ransomware is typically spread through phishing emails or by visiting an infected website. Other breaches are the result of hacking or through brute force attacks, which refers to a trial and error method where an attacker systematically tests possible passwords until they get a hit. So although we see several different ways that breaches happen, what I'd really like to emphasize here is that the majority of these breaches involve credentials being stolen. I think this is important for us to acknowledge, and we have to think about the impact stolen credentials can have on an organization, because just a single compromised credential can result in a breach, stolen data, ransomware attack. It all points back to those stolen credentials, whether through a phishing attack, a brute force attack, an employee clicking on an email they shouldn't, or downloading an attachment that has malware. All of that starts at the human level. So as we look at this breakdown of how breaches happen, we need to acknowledge that it's skewed toward human behavior. This is essential for us to understand so that we can empower our employees to become more aware and more vigilant and understand the impact of what those stolen credentials can mean. And we have to help them understand that it's not as simple as, you know, changing a single password on this little site, but it's really about the pattern. It's about having some internal policies in place, surely, but also about training team members to play a vital role in a company's overall security. So I'd like to take a moment and dig into this just a bit and talk about how employee credentials can lead to a breach. Here's a really great visual that I think helps us understand how real, but also how broad the risk can be. We're looking at 9 key functional areas of a business, from HR and payroll to email services to CRM, all the way through to banking and finance, collaboration, social media, and so on. As you look through here, I'd like you to maybe think about all of the places where your employees are going to perform their day-to-day job functions. All of those places where they're creating accounts and using their work email addresses and creating a password. I think we can be really great at addressing threats on the network, but we can't ignore all of these third-party sites where employees are creating logins. We have to think about those external threats, and in doing so, I think we need to talk about that human behavior piece and ask ourselves some hard questions. Are we confident, for instance, that employees are creating unique and hard to crack passwords for every single site they're using? Can we be sure they're not recycling passwords, or maybe just as worse, adding that token character to at the end and thinking they're all good? I know I used to do that. Because this is where that data on the dark web can really come back to hurt your company. When these accounts are connected by common emails and passwords, when users are using the same or a variation of the same login credentials across multiple sites. So let's say, for example, I use Expedia to book my travel, and Expedia experiences a breach, and I'm using that same password on Office Depot, and maybe I have an account at Office Depot with the corporate card on file to make purchases. Not good. Or what if I'm using that same password somewhere on the network? Once someone has a password to gain entry into an organization's network, they really do have the keys to the kingdom, so to speak. I think you can see how the potential for damage dramatically increases from just a single compromised username and password. As a quick example to illustrate the point, I was talking to an IT provider a few weeks ago who told me about a client of theirs who learned about the effects of stolen credentials the hard way. This particular client had an employee who received a phishing email that appeared to have been sent by DocuSign, something they used pretty regularly for contracts and agreements and such. The employee clicked the link in the scam and when prompted, entered his login credentials for DocuSign. The cybercriminal was then able to take those same credentials and use them to successfully log into the employee's email account, where he promptly sent an email to the company's bank instructing them to wire $50,000 to an offshore account. Unfortunately, the bank didn't call to verify the request and wired the money, $50,000, straight into the hands of the cybercriminal. The company had to get the FBI and the Treasury involved, and from what I understand, it was a pretty long, drawn-out, and stressful affair. In the end, this organization did get their money back since the bank didn't follow procedure, but that was after a whole lot of time and resources were spent. Or just another quick example, how about this story that a colleague of mine came across through a dark web scan. Another provider discovered dozens of passwords out on the dark web for a particular organization. And when reviewing the compromises with the client, the accounts payable person recognized one of the passwords from the old account payables person who had left a sticky note. Yes, a sticky note behind that indicated the same password was used to log into the company's bank accounts. Well, right there at the meeting with this client, they took that password and logged right into the company's Wells Fargo account and found that the old accounts payable person still had an active account. Keep in mind that this employee had been fired more than 2 years previous. The kicker was that this account also had access to more than $1 million in cash as well as lines of credit. Really good thing they tried the password on the Wells Fargo site before a hacker did and took steps to cancel the account. Now, granted, this is a pretty extreme story, but we hear stories like this quite often. Even when a person no longer works at a particular company, they may still have active accounts on third-party sites. Companies can be really good at turning off permissions on internal sites, but we often forget about all of those external sites that the employee has access to as well. So a dark web scan helped that company identify a vulnerability and avoid some pretty major losses. But you can, again, see how just that single exposed email and password can have this domino effect that leads to lost revenue and downtime and damaged reputation. Just a lot of potential for disaster when those bad guys get the hands on employee data. So with the prevalence of data breaches and stolen employee data, it's helpful to think about security through the lens of what's referred to as the zero trust framework. This concept of zero trust is an acknowledgement and belief that everyone has been compromised, that if we ran a scan on the dark web for all of the attendees on this webinar, for instance, every person on here would likely have something pop up. Maybe the severity of the exposed data would vary, but zero trust is this idea that we should operate under the assumption that we've all been compromised. Because once we accept that, we can then shift our focus to access management. That is, making sure that the right people have the right secure access to the right machines at the right privileges. All the while, of course, making sure we're monitoring for those compromised credentials and external threats. This framework really lets us manage individual access to make sure that we don't have team members accessing the network when and where they shouldn't, or logging into machines that they shouldn't have access to, or having privileges to sensitive data and applications that are beyond what's needed for their particular job. Establishing this cybersecurity framework really allows us to identify and address any gaps, but I think beyond that, zero trust allows us to work towards alignment with compliance laws as well, which dictate how we approach security and access management. Because here's the thing, compliance and privacy are no longer optional, and security and compliance really go hand in hand. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on compliance during this conversation, but I think it's important to note that we're seeing compliance regulations make their way around the world, and they're everywhere now. Certainly started with the GDPR in Europe, which was that first entry into making compliance mandatory, and now it's here in every state. California and New York, of course, have set the bar pretty high here in the States by requiring even small businesses to have insights into what their employees are doing and how and when they're reporting breaches. And we expect compliance regulations to only strengthen and expand from where they are today. So cybersecurity is no longer this nice to have. It really is mandatory and something that businesses are required to do. I wanted to circle back and spend a few more minutes on phishing attacks, since they are the most prevalent way that breaches occur, because we continue to see year-over-year increases in phishing scams, but it's picked up even more during the COVID pandemic, as noted here by the FBI, who warned businesses back in April of the growing threat. The pandemic really is a dream come true for criminals to rely on deception and creating a sense of urgency to achieve success with phishing campaigns. So these past several months have presented a huge opportunity to snag victims. During a crisis, I think we're more on edge. We're seeking out information and direction and guidance, and it really is this perfect time for cyber criminals to capitalize on the uncertainty and the rapid changes and the overall disruption that makes us even more susceptible to phishing emails. Because we're hungry for information and we're accessing information in different ways and at different times than normal, I think they know that we're less likely to take the time to really examine a message and make good decisions on whether to open and click. So not surprisingly, we have seen a surge in COVID-related phishing scams, and lots of them. Here's a real example that we pulled that plays on that need to stay up to date on the latest news and developments. This particular example appears to be sent from the CDC, and it includes a link to a list of new cases in the area. We've pointed out some of the telltale signs here that can help a user identify this as a scam: the fake email address, the overly generic greeting, some grammar issues. But these messages are really timely and relevant, and for the distracted, emotional, and maybe information-hungry user, I think it can be pretty effective too. Here's another example. This was tailored to a specific company. In this case, you'll see Miller Supply, and it's requiring all staff to attend a seminar to learn about the virus and then do a survey to demonstrate their understanding. Since it appears to be sent from an internal team member, Sarah Williams in this case, it could definitely be quite compelling to recipients who want to make sure they're following all of the company directives. But why limit phishing scams to just email, right? Cyber criminals realize that they can also carry out these attacks through text messages too. We've always got our phones with us. We're constantly looking at incoming messages. How easy is it to be caught off guard and see a new text message that we click on without really thinking about it? So the bottom line is, unfortunately, that phishing emails are getting increasingly sophisticated and targeted and tough to detect. But there are some steps that we can take to identify the scams. So we've all been focused on good hygiene and washing our hands to decrease our risk to the coronavirus. What if we apply that same hygiene to our email? What if we trained our employees to take at least 20 seconds to examine an email and look for those telltale signs? We know there are things that we can look for to help weed out the scams from the legitimate emails. Here's a list of some of the key things to look for. So for instance, see if the message includes super generic content or that broad impersonal greeting. Second, always look closely at the email address, especially the domain. A lot of times it'll be off by just a single letter or number, but that's all it takes to tip off that it's a scam. Third, consider if the message is trying to create a false sense of urgency, or maybe it's got some strong demands for actions. And always look very closely at any link before clicking. Simple mouse over can tell us if the destination looks legit or if it may be steering us into a trap. Fifth, put on that copy editor hat. Look for those misspelled words, incorrect grammar, or weird messaging that phishing scams are notorious for. And then also make sure a site is secure before entering any sensitive data. And then finally, think twice, maybe even 3 times before clicking on any attachments. Most computer viruses, as we said, are spread through email attachments. So although it can look super important, it can also have malware that can cause a lot of damage. I think so often we can be in a rush and distracted when checking email. We want to stay on top of things. But if we take just 20 seconds to stop and look for these key things, it can save a whole lot of trouble and potential for disaster down the road. Vivitec has lots of examples and resources that you can use to help educate your employees on what to look for. I cannot stress enough that it's these kinds of resources, as well as ongoing security awareness training, that can help you change your employees' behavior, establish those good habits, and create a culture of security within your organization. We have focused a lot on the fact that our employees, while often our greatest assets, can also be the weakest link in security. And I am not talking about that rogue or malicious employee. I'm talking about the well-meaning employee who clicks the bad link or opens the bad attachment or uses the same simple password over and over and over again. We need to empower those employees to become the strongest link in security by training them to be vigilant and cautious. We've talked quite a bit about the prevalence and effectiveness of phishing scams, so it really is essential that employees are able to spot a phishing scam. Best way to do that, of course, is through practice. Phishing simulations or mock attacks can help them stay vigilant, stay cautious, and hopefully able to successfully spot those phishing scams. Great way to address gaps and then deliver the appropriate security training, which increases that awareness by covering the most important cybersecurity topics. So in the end, that effective ongoing security awareness program can help reduce your company's vulnerabilities by building what we refer to as that human firewall, which can turn those employees into a really important and integral part of the overall cyber defenses. So to underscore this need for a solid security awareness program, I'd like to show how easy it can be to launch successful phishing scams. Phishing kits like this, what's on the screen here, are available for purchase on the dark web, and cyber criminals, even those with minimal technical skills, can easily launch phishing campaigns using these pre-made phishing templates and step-by-step instructions. And if they don't have a list of targets, not to worry, they can buy mailing lists on the dark web too. Pretty convenient, I guess. As part of those phishing kits, legitimate websites are cloned, and that login page is changed to point to a credential stealing site. Emails, of course, are then sent with those links pointing to the new spoofed website. Here is a side-by-side of the actual Facebook landing page and the landing page included in the phishing kit. I don't know about you, but it's nearly impossible to tell the difference, and you can see just how effective it is. Most users, probably including myself, would be hard-pressed to tell the difference between these two. Just as another quick example, this one for eBay, and again, just as difficult to discern the real from the fake. I think these examples show why these kits can be so effective, and because they make it so simple and effortless to launch, it's a pretty compelling business proposition for bad actors who are looking to profit off of our data. So we know that the dark web refers to the part of the internet that's intentionally hidden and inaccessible through some standard browsers and methods. We know there's a thriving marketplace for the buying and selling of stolen credentials, but we may not have that clear picture of what exactly the dark web looks like, how it operates, how cyber criminals are able to conduct their business. So we thought it might be helpful to share some actual snapshots that our analysts grabbed so that we can get a good look at the dark web. So here is a snapshot from the dark web. Criminal organization is offering up credit cards to buyers. Maybe a little bit tough to read on your screen, but it's an advertisement for the full package. Actual physical credit cards, complete with pins and spending limits, basically everything they need to put these cards to use. And this particular offer will ship directly to buyers discreetly via FedEx, so your neighbors don't even need to know what you're up to. Or how about this one? Big election year, but not even our voter registration information is safe. Check out this product offering that includes the full names, addresses, date of birth, gender, phone numbers Lots of personal identifiable information there. But it's not just limited to Kansas, unfortunately. Here's that same offer for lots of other states as well. And notice these prices, again, maybe a little bit hard to read, but $10,000 plus for these stolen credentials. And check out this listing for the largest known data dump for just $10. This one includes 2.7 billion records, 773 million of which have email addresses and passwords that were used on breached sites. Again, notice how these criminal operations are run similar to legitimate businesses that you and I might use to shop, complete with ratings on responsiveness and product quality. And here's a dark web listing offering up data on California business owners. Notice the reference to fulls in the listing title. That's a term used by fraudsters to indicate that it's got the full package of identifying information, usually name, social security number, date of birth, account numbers, and more. Fulls are used in things like credit fraud schemes, and they're very valuable. As you can see, this one was so popular it sold out. Finally, lots of us are using Zoom to meet and collaborate while we're working from home. We're even using it now for this webinar. As a result of the coronavirus pandemic, lots of people have turned to Zoom to connect. They went from 10 million daily participants in December to, I think, roughly 300 million daily participants in April. And with that crazy increase in usage also came concerns around Zoom security practices. One particular area of concern is the new Zoom bombing phenomenon. Probably heard of this, of course, where uninvited attendees troll Zoom meetings with the sole intent of disrupting the meeting, often doing some pretty disturbing and troubling things. Well, hackers got a hold of a bunch of compromised Zoom accounts, posted them on the dark web so that bad actors can get everything they need to bomb the meetings. In mid-April, a cybersecurity intelligence firm found more than 500,000 Zoom accounts for sale on the dark web, with accounts being sold for less than a penny, from what I understand. Quite a bargain, I guess. And if anyone's looking for a career change, the Dark Overlord is hiring, and he pays quite well. This is an actual job posting from the dark web. For just 10 years of experience and some innovative thinking, a cyber criminal can make a whopping $762,000 to start, increasing to over $1 million in just 2 years. Again, what I find so interesting here is that there's a probationary period, performance reviews, just like a legitimate company might put in place. So turning now from snapshots of the dark web, I wanted to touch on really quickly a couple of emerging methods that we're seeing cyber criminals use to execute attacks. One is this trend where ransomware attacks escalate to extortion. It goes a little something like this. The general consensus has been that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, don't pay the ransom because it's likely you're not going to get your data back anyway. Simply put, there's just no guarantee that paying off cyber criminals will get that data back. Well, cyber criminals are now not just encrypting the data, they're also stealing it, and they're telling victims that if they don't pay the ransomware, they'll release the stolen data on the dark web. It's essentially double extortion, right? They're extorting victims with the demand of an initial payment to get their data back, and then they're extorting them a second time by threatening to make the data public if they don't pay the ransom. So with this escalation, there's the possibility of really sensitive information being exposed, so that even if an organization can afford to rebuild and restore the data on its own, they now have the added pressure of paying just to keep their files off of the dark web. This tactic first emerged in late 2019 when a gang of cyber criminals known as Maze launched a ransomware attack against Allied Universal, which is a large security staffing company. Allied Universal refused to pay the $2.3 million ransom. So as soon as the ransom deadline passed, the attackers leaked about 10% of what they'd stolen and threatened to release the rest of the data if the company didn't meet their demands. That following month, Maze launched a very similar attack against the city of Pensacola, Florida, that completely shut down the city's administration for a while. Maze, again, in that case, stole the data and then threatened to release it if payment wasn't made on time. So you can see This extortion tactic is yet another example of how cyber criminals are getting smarter and more sophisticated in the way they're executing the attacks. And as we think about the ways that they can get their hooks into your business and cause all kinds of damage and chaos, I think it's important to think about what would happen if your business suffered an attack like this, and whether you've got a business continuity in place, plan in place to make sure that if disaster does strike, you're able to minimize the downtime and the effects to your organization. And speaking of ransomware, we've also seen the emergence of ransomware as a service, which shows just, again, how sophisticated and turnkey some of these methodologies are. Ransomware as a service borrows, of course, from the software as a service, or SaaS framework. For a subscription costing just a few $100s a month, cyber criminals can get a pretty nice, snazzy branded platform like this to log into, and then they can add in all of their contacts and companies that they want to launch an attack against, all the people that they'll send the ransomware to, and there are even some pre-made templates ready to go to make it even easier. Essentially, they could just sit back and monitor the attack through their dashboard, track who's opened, who's clicked the link, who's paid the ransom. This whole ransomware as a service is a really easy way to operationalize ransomware attacks for deployment at a very large scale, and it allows even the novice cyber criminal to launch attacks without too much difficulty. So we've talked a lot about the ways that cyber criminals can steal data and how that data is bought and sold on the dark web and how easy and sophisticated their methodologies can be. But this doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, I promise. Yes, there are some serious threats out there that can cause some serious damage to your business. But if we're aware of those threats and if we take some steps to increase security, we really can minimize the risks and help protect your business and your employees. Here are some tips to start moving in that direction. Some of these we've already touched on, but wanted to circle back, of course, on compliance. As we said, compliance is no longer optional. It is required, and there are some tools out there that can help you automate compliance, make it a little less daunting. We've talked about the importance of password management and the ramifications of exposed passwords. So it's incredibly important to help employees protect those passwords, both on the network and off, perhaps through a password manager. You can add an extra layer of security through two-factor authentication. Part of that zero trust framework that we talked about is ensuring that the right users have the right access. 2FA can help with that. And there are some great solutions out there that provide a balance between convenience and security. Monitor the dark web. We talked quite a bit about how exposed credentials can lead to catastrophe. Ongoing credential monitoring can provide those critical early alerts that can help prevent a potential costly and widespread data breach down the road. And then finally, and I think most importantly, make sure you bring in a team that you trust to help put together the security strategies that will work best for your company. Lean on them, to provide that guidance and advice that will help you stay on top of the changing threat landscape. You're busy, you have your hands full running your business, you're working hard to build your business. I encourage you to protect your business by, yes, certainly understanding the risks that we've discussed today and accepting that there are some measures you can take to minimize vulnerabilities, but also bringing in that team that you trust and relying on them to help guide you through the current threat landscape. I know the team at Vivitec is fully prepared to help provide that guidance and put in place a plan to get where you need to be with security. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Terry. I know he's got a couple concluding thoughts, and I'll turn it back to you, Terry.
Thanks, Kim. What great information. I especially like the good email hygiene that keeps us all nice and squeaky clean. And
That's right.
as far as any part of any great security program, you're going to have prevention in place, as well as prevention with a human firewall. We always talk about that is the most important part of your security program, is having that human firewall. Awareness in your customers, your employees, everybody around that. So just a couple of questions that came in while you were talking. Again, what great information you gave us. Thank you so much for giving us your day today. But one of the questions that came in was, how do I get my credentials off of the dark web once they've been exposed?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm not sure the asker is going to like my answer very much. So unfortunately, once your credentials are on the dark web, there is no way to remove them. Anyone who makes that promise to you is not being truthful, unfortunately. And I think that's one of the reasons why exposures are so troublesome. Once your information is out there, you simply can't get it back. You can't remove it. But I also think this is why it's important to team up with that knowledgeable team because they can provide the guidance to mitigate the risks posed by those exposed credentials. And I think it's also why ongoing dark web monitoring is so incredibly important. We often see scammers will piggyback on exposures with additional and even more targeted scams that can lead to even more problems. So that ongoing credential monitoring really does provide that critical early alert so that when there are additional exposures, you can take some swift action.
And then again, it goes back to prevention and keeping it from happening. So if we can keep it from happening, then it's gone forever. So good. So another question that came in was, how often do you check the stolen emails and passwords on the dark web? Is it like a one-time thing or a monthly thing, or how does that work, Kim?
Sure. So if you are enrolled in ongoing dark web monitoring, that is 24/7, 365 monitoring of the dark web. It's ongoing so that as soon as any email address that includes your company's email domain is found, it's immediately reported so that you can be notified and take the necessary precautions to, again, prevent that potential widespread data breach. So it's that external monitoring that certainly provides some peace of mind, ensuring that as soon as there's a new exposure, it's detected and the mitigation can be put in place to minimize any threats by those stolen credentials.
Thank you. We've got time for two more questions here. I think I got two more that came in while you were talking. One more. If I find out that my employees have stolen info on the dark web, what should we do about it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And apologies if I sound like a broken record here, but first and foremost, work with the experts, work with your security provider. They'll be able to provide that advice and guidance to minimize any potential vulnerabilities. There may need to be a scan on the computer of the user, maybe the network, and some security checks may need to be completed. But, for the employee, it certainly should be suggested that they immediately change that compromised password on every account where that password or any variation of that password was used. So that's making a list of all the websites, even considering all of the accounts, even those that aren't work-related, where the password may have been used, and then logging into every single one of those accounts and changing the password. Simply put, that password should no longer exist anywhere at any time in the future. And then, of course, they should be vigilant and looking for any unusual activity. We talked about how scams and things will actually often piggyback on one another, so it's imperative that they're even more vigilant against any additional scams and emails, as well as any unusual activity.
Fantastic, Kim. I got one last question here, and then I'll let you answer this, and then I'll add a little bit to it because I kind of have some ideas on this one too, and then I'll close it out. Sound good?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So how does the dark web scanning work, and how can I get it?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll definitely tackle the first part of that. How does the scanning actually work? So dark web scanning I shouldn't even call it scanning, monitoring. It's monitoring the dark web, as I said, for those stolen credentials associated with an organization's top-level email domain. As soon as a compromise is detected, it's immediately reported to the portal so that your provider can alert and provide the next steps for that user. So it's that early detection that's really the key to prevention, right? It can take companies sometimes months before they go public with a breach, but you can be aware of exposed data as soon as it hits the dark web through that ongoing monitoring. specifically, how do we do this? We're, again, monitoring those top-level email domains and harvesting data, certainly from, typical hacker sites like Pastebin. But a lot of our data actually originates from sites that require some credibility or membership within the hacker community to enter, which is why we actually use a team of analysts in addition to artificial intelligence to infiltrate and gain access to those closed communities. So we are monitoring internet relay chat room channels, private websites, feeds, and we're executing about 10,000 refined queries daily to make sure that we're scouring the dark web and reporting any exposures as quickly as possible.
Great, thanks, Kim. And how can I get it? That's a conversation between you and I. And I'm going to be sending out an email after this presentation. As soon as we get everything recording finished, as I said earlier, you'll get a free recording of this. I'll send that out by Friday, and then we can set up an appointment. Then I can run the scan for you, and we can go from there. So again, as an added bonus for joining us today, I want to thank you again for your time. I hope you got your sandwich finished and your drink finished, and you had a great lunch. And we're going to give you a complimentary dark web assessment and consultation, as well as a complimentary network assessment and consultation. Now remember, that network consultation is worth about $1,500 in value for companies with 15 or more users. Again, I want to say thank you to Kim. Thank you for our participants. Thank you for all the people that showed up today, and enjoy the rest of your day. I will be in touch very soon. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye now.